All right, good morning, everyone. So, no pastor in the church this morning. We can do anything we want, right? Yeah, okay. All right, as we're going through those prayer requests, uh, it's apparent to me that there's a lot going on in the world and a lot going on in our lives and a lot of things that trouble people. And I think we would hope that life would be smooth. We hope that life would be easy. We hope we can just go from one thing to the other without any hitches and just to enjoy life. But, as we're sharing those prayer requests, it becomes apparent that there are plenty of issues that come up in everyone's life. And I'm sure all of us can look back on this past week and we can probably think of something that interrupted us, something that we didn't expect, something that may even have troubled us. And so when we talk today about preparing to intervene, this is not something that's going to come up once in your lifetime. This is something that comes up all the time. It comes up every week, every day. There's going to be somebody in your life. If it's not you, it's going to be somebody near to you who has something going on where they may need your intervention. The thing is that in our culture, we're not really we're not really good at this. I remember when I was starting school as a little boy. You have to understand the era in which we grew up in the 1950s. Uh, there weren't very many Chinese in San Diego. I think my parents knew all the Chinese people in San Diego, and the whole thing was just blend in with everybody else, don't get into trouble, just be a good kid. And so I remember when I started school, my mom said to me something like, "Don't make any trouble, listen to your teacher, do whatever your teacher tells you to do, just be a good boy." And that's what she wanted me to do. And to get involved in something that might have been troubling someone else, she would say, "No, no, no, just ignore it. Don't bother with that." And that's kind of the way that I grew up, to just stay out of things. And then I remember taking a class at Fuller Seminary years ago. The late Dr. Hoover Wong was teaching this, and he was talking about the Chinese students at Fuller. And he said that sometimes they would have these students get together, and I don't want to say, I don't know, maybe protests and demonstrations is a little bit strong for a seminary, but they were doing things to make people aware of certain issues. And so he said that yeah, they'd have these rallies in the one of the courtyards, and the Koreans would show up for it, the Japanese students would show up for it, and they said, "Where are the Chinese students?" "Oh, they're in the library studying." And that's the way we do things. So we don't like to get involved. But as we think about this topic today, preparing to intervene from the book of Esther, that God empowers us when he calls us to intervene. And there are many moments as men and women of God where God is going to call us to intervene. And if you know the story of Esther, I wish we had time to go through the whole 10 chapters of the book, but maybe on another time. But Esther is an amazing story. And God is calling Esther out to intervene for her people. And we want to see what Esther's response was to her call. And I think there were three different steps, three different phases that Esther went through as she encounters this call. And so let's take a look at that. We're looking in the fourth chapter of Esther. And let me start with verses 9 through 11. It says that Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. And so the first response that Esther has, oops, let's see, I'm always, oh, you got to turn on, you got to wait, you get the green light there. And we press, there we go, all right, I got it down. All right, so the first thing is, Esther, she feared. And of course, this is a very understandable response. She had heard that her cousin Mordecai, who was an older cousin, that he had learned of this decision that had been made to destroy the Jewish people. And Esther learned that Mordecai was sitting out in the courtyard, not in the king's courtyard, but outside of it. He was sitting there in sackcloth and ashes. And this was not normal, and she's wondering what's going on. And so she sends this servant of hers, Hathach, to learn more about what is going on with Mordecai. And so Mordecai tells this servant that there has been a plan to annihilate the Jewish people, and that this is why he is in sackcloth and ashes. This is why he is mourning. He even gives the details of the plan. This man Haman, who just had this thing against Mordecai. Mordecai refused to bow down to him, and Haman just couldn't tolerate that. He thought he was a dignified person, and everybody should bow down to him. But Mordecai refused to bow down to him, and so Haman had devised this plan not only to execute Mordecai, but to get rid of all the Jewish people in the kingdom. And he apparently was a very wealthy man and had pledged an amount of money for this annihilation to occur. And so the king had heard from the king had heard from Haman. There were these people who are out to get you, king. They're rebelling against the kingdom. We got to get rid of them. And the king goes, oh, yeah. And so he issues this decree to have this annihilation happen. And so Mordecai reports to Esther through Hathach about the amount of money, which was a substantial amount of money. He reports about the decree that Haman had the king issue. And so Esther hears about all these things through Hathach, and she just can't imagine, what is going to happen now. And so Mordecai says that there's only one thing that we can do. Esther, you have to go to the king. You have to beg for his favor and plead with him on behalf of your people. And of course, Esther is fearful, all right, because she, just as we read here, she tells Mordecai through Hathach, anyone who goes to the king inside the inner court without being called could be put to death. This was a normal procedure, unless the king holds out his golden scepter. And Esther is the queen, so you would think she has some in with the king, but she mentions that she has been not called to be in the king's presence for 30 days. And you kind of wonder about this. Why hasn't the queen seen the king for 30 days? Has the king forgotten about Esther? What's going on here? It doesn't really tell us. But because of that, it was natural for Esther to be fearful in this situation, because it was a life-threatening thing that Mordecai was asking her to do. So I think we need to understand something about fear. Fear is a natural reaction to dangerous situations. I don't know if your parents ever told you, like you're going to the dentist and you're going to get your teeth pulled or something, and your mom says to you, oh, don't be afraid. What do you mean don't be afraid? He's going to yank out my tooth. But, fear is a natural reaction to dangerous situations. But what we have to consider is, what are the consequences if we fail to intervene? And that's what Mordecai is bringing before Esther. That, yeah, Esther, I know you're afraid, but Esther, if you don't do this, there's going to be loss, and there's going to be loss in your family. And there are bad things that are going to happen. And so, yeah, fear is a natural reaction to dangerous situations, but we have to consider the consequences if we fail to intervene. All right, so the next thing that happens is Esther hears what Mordecai has to say. And so her next response is to call for a fast. And it's interesting here that it only talks about a fast. It doesn't say fast and pray. It says to fast. But if you look all throughout the Bible, whenever there was fasting, prayer was involved. And so we assume here that what Esther was calling for was a time of prayer. Uh, the thing about fasting, whenever it was mentioned, it meant that the prayer was more serious. It was more directed. There was a special focus about the prayer. And so when Esther is calling here for a fast, it means this is a serious time of prayer. So let me read verses 12 to 17 here to see what she says. Then Esther's words were reported to Mordecai. He sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all Jews will escape." And so the most famous verse of the book of Esther. "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will, you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." And so this is an interesting final plea that Mordecai makes towards Esther. If you remain silent, he says that relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. And so Mordecai seems confident that even if Esther refuses to act, that the Lord will deliver his people. Mordecai seems to have this sense that these are God's chosen people and that God has a plan for the Jews and that God will institute some way for them to be saved. But he is telling Esther, Esther, you and your family are at stake here. There are going to be people killed. And it's up to you to take this step. And if you don't do this, you and your father's family will perish. And again, that's an interesting choice of words because we learn from the earlier part of Esther is that she had been orphaned. Her parents had died. We don't know if it was in the exile or in some warfare or something, but her parents had died. And Mordecai had been the one taking care of her. But he says here, you and your father's family will perish. And apparently, Esther had, she had experienced this loss of family before. And Mordecai brings that to the forefront here to say, we don't want this to happen. We don't want to see this happen again for more lives to be lost. And so he tells Esther, you and your family are at risk. You are not going to be exempt from this annihilation that takes place. And so then comes that famous statement in verse 14, "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." And I think all of us know how to apply that verse, that we think about the positions that we're in. We may not be in a royal position, but we're in a place of employment. We live in a certain neighborhood. We go to a certain school. We shop at 168 or Ranch 99 or wherever. We're in that place. And who knows that, what is the reason that God has called us to be in a place at such a time as this. And so Esther hears the challenge. And she does not act on her own. She tells Mordecai to have all the Jews in Susa, Susa is the capital city, to fast for 3 days. And she says that her and her attendants will do the same thing. Now, what's amazing about this point in the story of Esther is that prior to this, The one who is calling the shots has been Mordecai. Mordecai is the one who has told Esther to get in line to try to become the queen. Mordecai has been communicating with Esther about what she should be doing. Even just prior to this, when the annihilation is announced, he's the one who makes Esther aware of this. But it's interesting here, at the moment of prayer and fasting, there's a transformation that happens in Esther. She's been taking her directions from Mordecai, but from this point forward, Esther starts to take the lead. And she's the one who starts making the decisions. She's the one who starts taking the steps to save her people. Yeah, we have a tendency, I think, to underestimate the power of prayer and fasting. I think a lot of times we do it, we say, yeah, we're going to do this as a church, we're going to pray, and we might even call for a fast at certain times. And, we just look at it as part of standard Christian protocol. We're Christians, we're a church, there's certain things we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have a worship service, we're supposed to have small group meetings, fellowship group meetings, we're supposed to have a prayer meeting, and so prayer becomes part of the standard protocol of churches. But we need to understand here that prayer can change the movement of events, that prayer can change history. I often remember about Hannah being in the house of the Lord and crying before the Lord, asking for a son, and Eli thinks she's drunk. And she says, no, I'm crying out to the Lord. And the Lord hears her prayer and grants her a son, who becomes Samuel. Think about how that prayer changed the course of the Israelite nation, because Samuel became the last of the judges, and then he anointed the first two kings of Israel. And so Hannah's prayer for a son, it wasn't just to have a son, it changed the course of the nation. And here, as Esther is praying, she's asking once again for the Lord to intervene and to change the events that are about to happen. And then, of course, prayer can also change a person. We're not just, going through the fast food line, God give me an A on my test, God give me a boyfriend, God give me a girlfriend, I'll take fries with that. Certainly, we make requests, but we have to understand the power of prayer and fasting. That prayer can change who you are. It can change the person. And that's what happens with Esther here as she begins this time of prayer and fasting. She starts to take charge. She starts to become the dominant person in this story. All right. So the third phase she goes through is that Esther followed through on what she needed to do. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this story of Esther before, and maybe you've heard about the book, but Esther is one of the books in the Bible. I think Song of Solomon is the other one, where God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. You go all the way through the book of Esther. You never see the word God. You never see the word Lord. Of course, you don't see Jesus. God is never mentioned in this story. But the amazing thing is, he's all over the place. You can see how God is moving in this story of Esther. You can see how God is taking control of the events. You can see how God is intervening in the lives of people. And I remember years ago, Jenny and I were in China, and we were teaching English there. And I remember during one of the devotional times, I was sharing with the group about Esther, and I said to them, yeah, here's Esther, the story's going on, God is not mentioned, and yet God is in control of things. And I asked the group, does this relate to any of you? And they're all going, oh yeah, because we were in China, we couldn't outwardly share the gospel, And yet there were things going on that week where we knew God was in control and we knew God was present. And I don't want to get into all the stories, but let me just quickly say that there was, when we came back about 9 months later, one of the guys got a letter from one of the students we had been working with. And he told this church member of ours, some of us started going to that place where you guys were going. He was talking about a church. And he said, we believe the same things you do. And we all go, oh, okay. And you see, we never mentioned anything about Jesus. You know, we talked about Christmas, we talked about American holidays. We never sat down with them. Here's the 4 spiritual laws. You do want to believe in Jesus? You know, we never did that. You know, God was not mentioned. But God was there, and God was present. God was in control. And same thing here with Esther, that God's name is not mentioned in the story, but we can see God taking control. Let me show you where. In chapters 5 to 7, we have the story of how Esther followed through. And one of the things that happens is the king goes to sleep one night. He can't fall asleep. He's having one of those nights where he's trying to watch YouTube. He's trying to do all this stuff to go to sleep, and nothing is working. And so he asked one of his servants to do something really boring. Read to me the government documents. And so the guy starts reading, and it's revealed that Mordecai had actually done something to save the king's life, because there had been some other officials who were going to assassinate the king. And Mordecai had discovered that and revealed the plot. And the king says, well, what has been done for Mordecai? And the guy says, nothing. And the king is beside himself. How can this happen? And it's early morning now. And he said, we have to give some honor to this man Mordecai. And he asked, who's in the courtyard? And they look down, and of all people, it's Haman, the guy who had been trying to execute Mordecai. And so the king calls for Haman to come up, and it's kind of comical. The king asks Mordecai, I'm sorry, getting the names mixed up here. The king asks Haman, what should be done for a man who wants, who should be exalted? And Haman, it's him. And so Haman says, well, I put him on a royal robe, I'd put him on the king's horse, and I would parade him through the city. And the king says, that's a great idea. Haman, go get Mordecai. You're going to do that for him. And, Haman's just, he can't believe that he's being asked to do this because he wants to kill this guy. And so why was the king unable to sleep? You see, God is in control of the situation, and he brings to the king's attention what Mordecai has done. And so after that is done, then Esther comes walking into the palace unannounced. And of course, he could have Esther executed if he wanted to. But upon seeing Esther, the Lord gives favor to Esther. And the king is just delighted to see her. And he asks for Esther to come forward. And so you see, God is at work, even though his name is not mentioned in this story. And so Esther goes about to prepare these 2 banquets, and she invites the king and Haman. And this just gets Haman really going here, okay, because he goes home and he says, hey, you know what, I got invited to a banquet today, and it's just the king and me. Pretty cool, huh? And, Haman just thinks that he's being elevated here to this level where the queen wants him at this banquet. And they go to the banquet, and the king asks, well, Esther, what is it that you want? And she says, well, come tomorrow. I'm going to throw another banquet. And so, again, Haman is just delighted that he's invited to this second banquet that Esther is arranging. What happens in between there, however, is this thing about the king not being able to sleep, where he has to parade Mordecai through the streets. He has to exalt Mordecai among the people. And he just goes home and he's just really upset and he's beside himself. How could the king possibly make me do this? And his wife even says, Haman, Mordecai is going to get you. And she didn't realize how prophetic that statement was, because he is obsessed with getting rid of Mordecai. And now he has to go to the second banquet. He's being pretty much dragged to this second banquet because he's so upset that he had to parade Mordecai throughout the street. Of Esther, what amazes me here is that Esther is the only one who knows what's going on. Think of these three characters here. Haman is just full of himself. He thinks he's such a great person. He thinks he should be paraded through the streets. He's delighted that invited him to this banquet. Haman, he just thinks he's above everybody else. And then the king, this guy is the king, but he's clueless about what's going on. He's put out this edict to execute these people. And if you go back to chapter 3, verse 15, when that happened, it made this comment here. It says, the city of Susa was bewildered by this edict that had come out. And, the Jews had their enemies. The Jews have always had people against them. But in many ways, the Jewish people were responsible. They were good people. They were helping in the kingdom. They had a good reputation. And so it says the city of Susa was bewildered. Why are these people going to be executed? The king put out this edict. He has no idea what Haman is up to. And then the other thing I get sometimes perturbed about is that a lot of biblical commentators, they don't give Esther her due. She's the one who is taking charge here. She is the one who knows what's going on. And some of the commentators, they'll make statements like this. They'll say, well, Esther used her beauty and charm to convince the king. And, it's like, hey, king, what you doing today? And it's like Esther is buttering up the king so that he'll change his mind. No, Esther is thinking. Esther is a tremendously intelligent woman. She's taking charge, and she's going to make these charges against Haman in just a very few moments. And she's the one who is saving the nation. It says she was a beautiful woman. That is not to be argued, but it wasn't this thing about men and women that was convincing the king. It was because Esther had the Spirit of the Lord on her, and she was taking charge. And so during the second banquet, she exposes Haman's plot to destroy her people. And this leads to a sequence of events to save the Jews. Haman is executed. Mordecai is promoted to take the king's place. And the Jews are enabled to defend themselves from annihilation. So that's a quick summary of what happens in the rest of the book. You can read the story on your own. And what's amazing about this is that it saved the nation. And then about 40 years later, we have the story of Nehemiah going back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. That probably would not have happened if Esther had not stepped in. And so her moment of intervention not only saved herself and saved her family, but it allowed for certain things to happen in the future of the nation of Israel. All right. Yeah. Forgot to click there. Okay, so I want to show you this picture here. This is a elder board from a church in Sacramento. For the guy down in the lower right. And if you notice his name, I don't know if you can see that. His name is Sergio Brizuela. He's the only non-white person on the elder board. Sergio came to our youth group back in the 1990s. And it was a youth group where we were trying to reach a different segment that we were trying to reach. And let's see, time doesn't allow me to tell you the whole story, but uh, me as a youth pastor, I said, we need to reach kids on the west side of San Jose because our church is on the east side, and most of our kids live on the west side. We need to reach kids on the west side of San Jose. And my youth group kids, these were not pastors, these were youth group kids. They came to me at the next meeting and they said, we've been praying about this and we need to reach kids on the east side. And I said, well, what do you mean? We're supposed to go on the west side. They said, no, we have kids coming from the west side of San Jose. The church is in the east side of San Jose, and we're not reaching anybody here. We need to reach this side of the city. And I go, yeah, you're right. And I listened to the youth group kids. And a couple years later, Sergio was about 18. He walks into one of our meetings. He's got a hood covering half his face. And somebody, hey, this is Sergio, Pastor Vic. I go, hey, Sergio. He goes, hi. That's our first introduction. See, today, he's an elder on this church board in the city of Sacramento. He's the only non-white person who is an elder in that church. See, that happened because these youth group kids prayed about who they wanted to reach in the city of San Jose. And it changed the direction of the ministry. It changed Sergio's life. And you see, that's what happens when we intervene. And so, yeah, God is in control when he calls us to intervene. And, when might God call you to intervene? I think a lot of times we think it's, some major event like saving your population. But just think about the things that go on in life. Do you encounter someone who is discouraged? Do you encounter someone who is alone? Do you encounter a moment where the right thing needs to be done? You see, those are moments where we can intervene. And God calls us to intervene, and he will empower us when that moment happens. So, Lord, we bring ourselves before you. And, Lord, we wait for these moments. And when something happens and we can see that someone is in distress, when someone needs a companion, when someone needs a word from you, that you call us to intervene. I pray we would not sit back. We would not just avoid things. We would just not wait for someone else to do it. But we would take the opportunity to intervene in that moment and to bring the life-changing message of Jesus Christ into someone's life. So we pray for that today in Jesus' name. Amen.